Topic is technology and procurement, and my guest is Walter Charles. He is Senior Vice President and Chief Procurement Officer with Allergan. Hello, Walter. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you.
Thanks very much for being with us. This is a crucial issue, the use of technology in the world of procurement. Just in general, what are some of the tools out there that can help procurement officers to do a better job in their lives today?
Well, the good news is there's a raft of tools to almost solve any problem that you would be confronted with in the procurement space. I tend to focus on just those tools that actually drive the most impact, right? So if you can imagine just trying to find the smart bomb of tools that actually get after delivering incremental value, incremental lift for the business. And so that actually gets down to a pretty narrow swath of players. And I tend to focus on the source to contract work. So stuff that where 90% of the value is created for procurement is when we're doing negotiation. And then that's in the source to contract framework. And so tools that actually help enable the source to contract constructs are the ones that I focus on.
That's interesting, the contracts in general. There's so many things to consider in a contract today. You almost think you need like 1,000 pages to cover every possible aspect of a relationship. I'm sure that's not the case, but how do you get your arms around all the possibilities that might arise from a relationship with a supplier?
Yeah, so the good news is, the lawyers will give you a standard template that's probably 80 pages long that has all of the stuff that you could possibly imagine, including iterations there too. So that isn't really that difficult. I think when you talk about the permutations, though, of all of the combinatorial math that exists when you're choosing multiple different aspects of how you construct the deal, that's where you get more complicated stuff. So we use optimization engines at our business. And so if you can imagine, most procurement teams actually use Excel today. And Excel has meaningful limitations, I think, in terms of being labor intensive, extraordinarily slow to get to insights, and not able to really get after very large, big data sets effectively. And so if you had a 450 million data element Excel file called bid data, you couldn't necessarily manage that and get to actionable insights in seconds instead of months. And there are big data analytics engines now that can help you unlock the value in those deals and figure out what the combinatorial math problem is, so you can select the right number of options to get to the best outcome.
Yeah. Well, I guess you could divide the supplier relationship into three parts. That is supplier review prior to being chosen, onboarding once the supplier is chosen, and then the ongoing relationship after that. What about supplier onboarding? That can be a challenge. Is there a technology there that helps you?
No. Onboarding, usually you've got a bunch of people keying in whatever the contracted term is. It's really a pretty trivial task in the overall construct. There's some value that can be unlocked in the continuous day-to-day management, right? Both in figuring out what the continuous improvement journey needs to look like for that supplier, which is also kind of a value add. Also understanding where the supplier is basis the rest of the market and how they're evolving their cost curve to reflect the competition that exists now. But again, 90+% of the value created by procurement is at that negotiation interface. So if you can figure out how to blow off all of if you look at all of the 100-day plans that are out there, there's a lot of stuff that they want CPOs to consider in the first 100 days. If you're not driving impact, you're probably not going to survive the long journey.
But your job's not done even with the most perfect contract. Then you have the idea of monitoring the performance of the supplier on an ongoing basis.
Yep.
Where's the technology that helps you to do that?
Yeah, so there aren't any real good kind of holistic solutions yet for supplier monitoring, quite frankly, because if you actually charted supplier compliance, you get 99.9% of the time most of your folks are delivering. The challenge is that 0.1% of the time that's driving millions of dollars worth of lost revenues that you've got to get visibility to. So really the best tools are actually exception-based, only address the stuff that's actually material, and quantifies very quickly the materiality of the problem that you're dealing with. I remember when I was an early CPO at Kellogg's, and we had lots of SKUs, and understanding, doing the math to get from SKU number 26579 is impacting sales in Australia, you wouldn't have any real actionable data from that, right? So what you have to do is click, what is that, the bill of material explosion? what's the revenue line, and then how big is this problem? And you can actually dollarize the magnitude of the problem pretty quickly. So I actually built my own set of tools to help understand which are the bill of material SKUs that were a problem, that if they hurt us, I needed action like it was a fire. And then I had a trivial many that I didn't really have to worry about.
Have those tools continued to serve you as subsequently?
No, because quite frankly, I think procurement is actually parsed into two different buckets. You got the day-to-day ops stuff, which goes, in many cases, it's already been parsed to the plants. So the procurement teams that I have are MBAs, PhDs, JDs. They are actually hardcore negotiators, and their task is actually bound by getting that source to contract stuff done right, and then turning it over to the right people at the appropriate levels in the plants to actually make sure the ongoing stuff is monitored correctly.
When we talk about supplier visibility, and we talk about a multi-tier supply chain, with just about every supply chain is, sub-suppliers, sub-sub-suppliers and the like, how is that enabled by technology, or is that human relationships? Is there what was the challenge that you faced there over the years?
Yeah, so we used a number of different tools, guys like Resolink, for example, which is one of the ones we used at Biogen. Really cool tool, but you still have to go through the arduous task of mapping your supply chain down to the point of origin. And you've got an adoption challenge, right? So the question is, how do you get people that you don't have a financial relationship with to disclose where they are and how best they can support you in your supply chain? So you still have this economic problem, which says, how do you motivate the right resourcing for stuff that you've got a problem with, but you're 2 tiers or 3 tiers removed from the source problem. Seeing it is one thing, being able to action it once you see it is the challenge, I guess.
Blockchain has been touted as a solution to some of the things we're talking about today, in terms of the creation of so-called smart contracts, in terms of a system of record where it keeps track of where everything is, where it's going, and the like. Do you see that as a future solution?
I see there's the promise, the potential of a future solution. Again, I think when you look at the pilots that have existed with some of the largest companies on the planet, the ecosystem has to be ecosystem ready, right? So there's an ecosystem beyond just the technology solution provider that you've got to figure out how to solve for. And I think as that not only technology matures, but also the ecosystem around that technology matures, it has the potential of meaningfully disrupting the standard order of how we do it. The contracts will be embedded in a technology solution because people will agree on what they'll pay and what that transaction look like, and then the transaction will flow reasonably simply. No checks, no banks, except at the back end when you need the cash out.
But we're certainly not there yet.
Yeah, not there yet.
And the other aspect of technology that's getting a lot of talk these days is artificial intelligence. Can it replace human judgment? Can it handle the big data that supposedly is required to make supplier evaluations? Is that an important tool?
Yeah, so the last 3 companies I've had the privilege of using AI-enabled solutions to do everything from supplier discovery to making better decisions on the back end for what it is we're getting after. I believe AI is going to be a material disruptor. It's going to fundamentally change what we do, how we do it, and whether there's a human interface. And I think what we will be defining in the future is, imagine I've got Google Home Assistant, right? Imagine asking Google Home Assistant the effect of natural language processing to basically say, hey, I just did a bid 3 years ago in labels. It had 450 million data elements in it. Okay, Google, tell me how much of those SKUs, how many of those 5,100 SKUs have a forward-looking volume associated with it, and they'll give you a return. 76% of that is already done. Would you like me to contact suppliers and get that done for you? It's coming. It's coming.
It's a dream.
Yeah, it's coming, and it's not far-fetched. I think the technology exists today, but you've got to basically tether to robust systems and figure out how to get the data extracted out of what looks like SharePoints and a hodgepodge of data storage for us.
So give me a takeaway for procurement officers who are totally intimidated by the raft of technology and possibilities out there for them today. Where do they start? Where they should be going? What should they be thinking about?
You start where your biggest spend is, right? So I started in the source to contract journey. If you need to understand what those tools are and what the methodology is that you have to pivot to, I'm more than happy to reach out to you. But there will be an enterprise procurement platform that will be launched. It's called Enterprise AP Squared that will tether not only big data analytics on the back end, but also supplier discovery, next generation supplier discovery tools on the front end. And it will, I think, fundamentally game change how sourcing gets done.
Fantastic advice on how to go forward with this very complex issue of technology and procurement. Walter Charles, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
I have been speaking with Walter Charles of Allergan. Thank you very much for watching.